So we're going to start looking at Chapter 6 and looking at the geometric construction tools and making sure that you're aware of how to dimension, constrain, and edit sketches, make offsets, and all of the commands that are going to make your time in constructing your sketches and building your profiles a little bit more effectively. So I'm going to just first by starting off, I want to go over this one command before getting too far into the chapter. This is your constraint settings, making sure that you are aware of the settings that are here. I typically leave the constraints where they display the constraints on creation and when we're selecting objects to make sure that those pop up and you can see those when you're working with it. The one thing that I want you to look at today is option that you can change. As you are drawing and you're constraining your parts, you may notice that the parallel and perpendicular constraint is automatically being applied to your drawing. You do have the option of changing that to vertical and horizontal for your line. So as you're drawing and you're drawing the line, your horizontal constraint is going to be, or your vertical constraint is going to be what is the overriding priority of your geometric constraint. So you may want to try that for a couple drawings, see if you like it. If you don't like it, go back to parallel and perpendicular and just see if it's something you're interested in. I'm going to leave it on for the purpose of this drawing, and you can kind of see as we go through this and see if it's something that you want to use. So I'm going to first start off by just starting a basic rough sketch of the layout that they have kind of sketched out for us, and in the book I'm going to just kind of throw some lines down here, and you can see like I'm getting some locked in lines there, and it's making it pretty easy to let's see, just keep in some basic shape. There we go. And I'm going to just come back, draw that circle. So in Chapter 6, a couple things that we do discuss in the chapter is to make sure that you understand that you can click and drag on endpoints. You can bring, an object over. You can pick something by like the center point. You can relocate it by selecting on the point and dragging it to a different defined location. We can pick on that line, change that. You can kind of move things around, and that might be something that you're interested in as you're, sketching and you're trying to come together to get a basic shape there. So these are all, just pick and drag. As I'm doing this, I'm holding down my pointer button, and it's pretty easy to move those objects. So this is on an unconstrained feature or unconstrained curve. Just kind of as we're using that term curves, as this part is being constructed, just note that Inventor refers to any kind of lines, arcs, circles, things like that as a curve until it's created into a profile. Once it's a profile, it's going to be a region that is going to be able to be extruded. So we're always shooting for taking this basic geometry and turning it into a profile. That's how we're able to create our extrusions. So right now we're working with curves, and this is just basic geometry. So when you select, let's just select trim. If you read down at the lower left hand corner, it says to select portion of curve to trim or press and hold Control key. So I am going to pick on this line here, even though it's not technically a curve, so to say, it's not a rounded object, it's still part of that geometry that Inventor kind of looks at the geometry, or maybe what's called the wireframe geometry, and it identifies that as a curve. Okay, so I'm going to pick on that line. I'm going to trim that. I still need to make this line tangent to the circle because this part is totally unconstrained at this point. Who knows which is going to move over? The line going to go over to the circle, or the circle will go over to the line. Sometimes it does vice versa. It just really depends on what's there. So it looked like that line moved over. I did look like I may have that circle there on that line and maybe have forced that over. But anyway, so we want to trim the rest of this right here. So as I'm pointing to this, you can still see at the bottom. You can pick one object at a time. You can also hold down your control button and pick that as well. So I've kind of like clicked on that, kind of got rid of the basic stuff there, and I have not applied any dimensions at this point. So I'm going to use this auto dimension button here just to kind of see what it gives us by selecting it. I've got the basic shape, basic geometry. Before I do this, let me go over one other thing. So when we're creating these profiles, we always want to make sure that we are trying to close the boundary. We want to make sure that we don't have lines overlapping. Sometimes that can cause you to run into a problem. So be careful and try to like fully enclose that profile before you get ready to extrude it. So, trying to avoid overlapping lines or lines that may not have been trimmed back. Sometimes you have to zoom really close in to see if I didn't trim that and I just had a line there, did I really, get that cleaned up? So you're always shooting to make sure that your geometry that you've created on your sketch is fully closed and it's ready to turn into a profile when you finish this part. So with that said, let's go ahead and hit on that auto dimension button. So this is going to be the next thing that I'm going to work on. So I'm going to apply 10 dimensions, and there we go. Ton of dimensions. So there we go. A lot of dimensions that I probably would not have picked on my own, and the part does turn to a fully constrained part, but I'm not really happy with that. I'm probably going to hit the undo button, and I'm going to back this up, and I'm going to put my own dimensions on there the way I like it. So I'm just going to hit the undo button a couple times, and I'm going to start with my own dimensions. So locating the center of that circle to that line, I'm going to place that dimension there, and there we go. I want that to be 200. That's where we're going to start. So immediately, because they're all linked together, that whole entire view extended out and enlarged as one unit. So that really is a nice feature that Inventor has to make that all proportional. It used to not be like that. So I'm really happy to see that update in this software. So what I'm going to do now is just start to apply the dimensions that we have here and kind of get this part into shape. So working through this 50, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go ahead and knock out those dimensions, and then I will return. Alright, so I'm going to leave those dimensions right there. I've got a couple fillets that I need to add to it. As I was putting the dimensions on, I've noticed a conflict in the book. If you're looking at the dimensions that are given to you at the beginning of the chapter on page 6-3, they do not match the dimensions given on page 6-22. So the fillet size is a little bit different. I noticed the dimension over here where it was 115. This is actually 120 on page 622. So I'm going to stick with the dimensions on page 622. And for the exercise, as long as you're going through this exercise and you understand the offset command, project geometry, that kind of thing, the dimensions really aren't going to make as much difference. So the next thing I want to do is just to make sure that you know how to use the fillet command. So you have two options. The fillet, if you left the angle that is here, you could always go back and use the fillet command on the 3D model side of things. So that is an option. If you want to create the fillet in the original sketch, you can use your fillet command here and type in the radius and then select the two entities where you want the fillet to be created. So I'm going to pick on these surfaces here, and you know what, I'll save those two for the other one, so we can just go over that and make sure everybody is aware of how to use the fillet command. So finishing this off, I'm going to, oh, I'm missing something here. Let me go back. I did not link that back to 0, 0, and I hit the one button too far. So let's go back and look at that. So real quickly, I'll dimension this part down and get it fully constrained. So I'm going to put a 0 on that, and I'm going to dimension from the top to this right here. I'll turn that into 0, and there we go. So I've got some other lines here that are not constrained. I'm still missing 2 dimensions, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit the auto dimension button. This is where we're using that term curves here. It's just looking for any line or arc or any circle that's going to be considered to be just basic geometry. So I'm going to hit the apply button, and let's see, it gave me an angle there. I could have probably had that constrained with the tangent, but we've got it fully constrained now, and I'm going to go with that and hit apply and finish my sketch and extrude this into 5 millimeters. So type in 5 there. We're going to hit OK, and now I'm going to show you how to use the other fillet command if you have not done this at this point. So under your 3D model ribbon, you want to select the fillet. When you have fillet, you want to make sure that you're specifying the radius. So the radius for this is going to be 20, and we're going to now select on the edge. So the edge that I'm going to select, I got to make sure I pick 0 selected because we haven't specified an edge yet. But once we click on that, and now we're looking, Inventor's looking for us to pick an edge to fillet. So we're going to pick that one right there, and it's going to put a fillet on there, and then I'm going to spin it around and also put a fillet on this other corner. So just zooming in, pick on that edge. Notice that on the sketch you have to pick 2 lines to form that fillet. On the extrusion command, you're going to pick the edge. So I'm going to hit apply, and there we go. So we end up with our basic shape. I mean, there's always a couple ways to do everything, so you may not have chose the same approach, but what we're looking for is the same drawing with the same dimensions, and that's how you can get that. So now let's go ahead and project that geometry, and let's offset that sketch. So I'm going to start another sketch right here, and I'm going to use the project geometry, and I'm going to bring forward all of the geometry that is existing, and it's going to come forward to my existing sketch. So on that existing sketch, you will see those yellow lines there, and that is geometry that we can use. We do not need to redraw over top of it, so don't feel like you need to go back and redraw that that geometry. That yellow line or arc there is there for you to use, and that's what we're getting ready to do with our offset. So we're going to click on offset, and I'm going to right click. When I click on that, I want to make sure that I've got loop selected, and I do have that checked. So I'm going to pick on the yellow line there, or that edge, and it's going to drag an outline or the loop of that existing profile, and I'm going to just drop it there. I'm going to apply a dimension. I'm going to go back to my front view there so you can see the dimension. So I want this dimension to be 15 millimeters. So I'm going to hit OK there, and that updates that geometry, and we're looking at that sketch. So it created that profile, and I'm now going to finish the sketch. I've got the geometry, I've got the 2 loops, and now I'm going to cut the inside out. So the term profile, just want to make sure you're aware of your terminology. So your other type of geometry that you have selected is what's called a profile. So a profile is always a defined boundary. Okay, so it's always a closed loop, and we usually use the profiles anytime we're using extrusions or we're revolving something later on. So we're always looking for that closed boundary. It's very important to have a closed boundary when we're working with that. So I'm going to switch that to cut, and I'm going to hit OK, and there we go. So just to kind of show you how things are in relationship to each other, the book does suggest that you go and change the distance from the 120 millimeters to 150, and that way you can see the part update